You know, one of the things I said prior to the game is, you know, when it's all done and when we're all finished, it's not going to be the material things you miss. It's going to be like right now, this is what you're going to miss. And so we had that opportunity going in, and you know, we're all in the business of trying to make memories.
Memories. Man, do I have some playoff memories in the Superdome.
Hand off to McAllister. McAllister staying on his feet. And with some help, he's down to the goal line. It is in. Yes. Deuce McAllister with a convoy of blockers.
It's time for this team to make some playoff memories for themselves, for these fans.
On 4th and 14, will punt it away. He hangs it very high, angling it for the near sideline. Hakeem drops the ball! Oh. Hakeem drops the ball! Ryan Mill might have fallen on it at the 10-yard line! You've got to be kidding me! It is the New Orleans Saints football, Brian! There is a God after all!
It's time for the dome to be rocking and rolling, vibrating, and exploding with noise.
It's time, baby! It's time! Seize the game! Seize the game! We're fast! We're physical! We're aggressive! Seize the game! It's on time!
This is the moment we have all been waiting for. It's time. Prove them right.
Well, the New Orleans Saints hope to make many more memories and prove them right today here in the Mercedes-Benz Superdome. Welcome to the Saints pregame show. I'm Caroline Gonzalez, joined by longtime reporter Mike Haas and NewOrleansSaints.com senior writer John DeShazier. We'll hear from Saints head coach Sean Payton and quarterback Drew Brees, along with Saints legend Roman Harper. Well, gentlemen, we know that the road to Atlanta starts here in the Mercedes-Benz Superdome. This is not the same Philadelphia Eagles team that the Saints saw in Week 11 when they beat them 48-7. The Saints defense had an exquisite game against the Eagles last game. What did they do so well in that last game?
Well, obviously they took advantage of Carson Wentz. Carson Wentz was the quarterback that day. He's not the quarterback today. He had 3 interceptions. He was sacked 3 times. And the Saints really got after him and also slowed down the run, only 56 rushing yards by Philly. So if you can keep a team one-dimensional, and they got him into that one dimension, and the Saints had the requisite secondary to go against them, you can win a game by that kind of margin. They held Philadelphia to less than 200 yards, which is hard to do in an NFL game. But the Saints really found their stride during that portion of the season. I think that was one of those games where they scored 40-plus points for about 6 games this season. That was one of those games, and they really looked like the best team in the league at that point.
They did. They were playing great football, and certainly people will say, well, the Eagles are a different football team. It was Carson Wentz who did not have a good day. Nick Foles is now the quarterback. Darren Sproles did not play. Darren is back and certainly has not played much this season, but played 68% of the snaps, or 58% of the snaps against the Bears. But the Saints are kind of a different team as well. I mean, that was a very strong point of the season for them. They've come off the Rams victory, the demolishing of Cincinnati, but we did not have Ted Ginn Jr. did not play that game. That was, in my mind, Traquan Smith's kind of coming out party. Had a huge game, 10 catches, but he kind of got nicked up and was inactive that week, and he's only really had 6 catches since then. So, and I, listening to Sean Payton this week, I totally agree. He's like, gosh, that game feels like a year ago. And it was November 18th. And it does, though. You really, and this is a cliche, you do throw it out. You at least got the game plan, their defense and their offense and who they are, but because the personnel is so different with Nick Foles, I think it's just a different kind of atmosphere.
So do you completely nix the game film that the Saints have from that Week 11 game, or do you go back and watch the last 4 games for Nick Foles that he's played quarterback? What do you do to prepare a game plan if you're the New Orleans Saints?
Well, I think you got to look at it. Sean said this week that, you got to look at it. It is what it is. Teams in the middle of the hunt in December can't just go, you know what, let's totally abandon. So you kind of are who you are. You make changes every week. So Sean said, you go back and look at it. You look at your defense, what changes have been made. And certainly you look at the Nick Foles tape, really from that game on, the Eagles lost that game, fell to 4-6. Nick Foles says we could have gone one or two directions. He says that game brought them closer together. From that point on, they go 6-1. So yeah, you look at them, because I don't know if they're a different team philosophically, offensively, play calling. They're probably not. They're just a different team, I think, mentally, offensively.
Yeah, I think Nick Foles, one, he comes in having won the Super Bowl for him last year. So immediately he comes in with that confidence. Two, the thing that they do different with Nick Foles, I think, than with Carson Wentz. Carson Wentz held the ball a little bit longer. Nick Foles gets rid of it really quickly. So the Saints cornerback is going to have to be on point today, because he gets rid of it in 2.5 seconds a lot of the time. That means you got to be able to jam those guys up, slow them down, and allow the pass rush to get to Nick Foles. Otherwise, he's going to have a great day, because we've seen what happens when he's able to get rid of the ball fast. There's a reason they beat Chicago in Chicago, with the #1 defense in the league being Chicago. Nick Foles is a guy who's done it before. They believe in him, and when he's out there quarterbacking, they feel like they can win a game.
Well, the road doesn't frighten them at all. I mean, He takes over in December. They have to go play the Rams. They're 4-6. And you're looking at the Rams on the road. Basically, and this is a huge point, at least in my humble opinion, is that the Eagles have been in the playoffs since December 9th. Yeah. At 4-6, that's it. This is your playoffs. They go at LA, win, which at the time we were all as Saints fans going, yeah, way to go, Philly. Then they come home, beat a very good Houston team, go on the road and beat a Washington team that, even though it was a good win, you had to think in their minds, this is not going to be enough, because Minnesota's going to beat Chicago, and then they didn't, and then they go on the road to beat Chicago. So 3 of the 4 have been on the road, so the road doesn't scare them. In fact, I think they utilize that as kind of a leverage and an advantage. It doesn't scare them. They haven't been world beaters. Nick Foles had 2 picks last week. His quarterback rating was 77. He's played 6 games this year. Remember, he started the season. Carson was injured. He's had 6 games this year, and every game except one, he's had at least 1 pick. But like to John's point, he does a phenomenal job of staying in the pocket just long enough to get rid of it. He'll hold it, get rid of it quickly, but he'll hold it that last half a second to find a guy. So Saints defensive line, 49 sacks this year. I expect them to be there and get in his face and really disrupt him.
Well, we heard about what Sean Payton talked about in this Week 11 game, but let's go ahead and hear from him earlier this week about this Week 11 game.
Coach, how much has their secondary improved on tape from that first?
It has. I think they've been real consistent. Number one, they've minimized the big plays, and they've gone up against some pretty good offenses. I think that, look, there's a period of the season where you can see on film this consistent lineup. I think prior to that, there'd been a lot of moving parts, and I think Jim's done a good job of getting that group settled in, and you can see the communication. When they're in their dime package, certainly Malcolm's inside. When they're in their nickel, there's several packages you see. 3 safety look last week to Chicago. So we've got to prepare for all of it. But I think they're playing a lot better.
Sean, does it help to be playing a team that you've already played the season? Or
it feels kind of, no, I think it feels a little bit like when oftentimes in the playoffs, it's not unusual to play a division opponent. So when you play a team, look what happened to us last year relative to Carolina the first game, we'd already played them twice, and then Minnesota the next game, we'd already played them earlier in the year. So I think it happens more often than you think. And now that game seems like it was a long time ago, relative to the season. So that film is important. But, all the games, we've got, all 16 weeks in the playoff. You have all of that on your video screen, cut-ups and everything. And but haven't played them. Certainly for both teams, I'm sure there's a familiarity with personnel that I think is probably most important.
You said after that last game they played more man than you expected.
Yeah, they did. Listen, and over the years, I've always followed Jim and respected the job he does on defense. He's been a great coach in our league, and I just remember the last game, going back and looking at every tape, trying to find cases where maybe a top receiver was getting help and getting doubled, and there have been some examples, and yet in our game, man, it was a ton of man and a ton of double on Mike, and that really forced other players to have to, Kirkwood or Traquan or Dan Arnold, other guys had to make plays. There are times where they were doubling Alvin and doubling Mike literally, and everyone else had, kind of a cover zero look. So it forced us to make some adjustments quickly. But that's the fun thing about the games, because there's always some things that maybe that we're preparing for in here that we're not going to see Sunday, and then quickly you got to adjust.
Is that a drastic change then on how you call the game, or
Well,
just a little?
It's no, it's not a drastic change relative to how you call the game, but it's a drastic change relative to who might be within the progression of certain plays, what you want to do in the run game. Yeah, but there's certain things that's challenging. If Alvin's a primary, and it just forces these other guys in the route to have an opportunity to make some plays. And unfortunately, last time we played them, we did.
Well, guys, the storyline coming into this game is obviously Nick Foles, but it's also Darren Sproles, who will make his first appearance against this Saints team this season. What exactly do they add for this Philadelphia Eagles offense?
Well, certainly Nick. I mean, to me, they believe in him. I mean, he's been in the league since 12, the Super Bowl last year, and kind of what he's done the last 4 games to come in with Carson down and really, just give them hope and winning those games on the road and beating the Rams. So I just think they believe in him. I don't think they disbelieve in Carson. They just believe that somewhere down the road, he has kind of a calm demeanor in the huddle, and I think that just kind of plays to them being on the road. Darren Sproles, he played in week 1 against Atlanta, and kind of, they say he tweaked a hamstring, really didn't play much, missed 10 games, didn't come back to week 13. So he has not played a lot, but again, he just allows this offense so many more kind of back out of the backfield, catching the ball. I think his numbers are 29 rushes, 120 yards, 15 catches, 160 yards. That sounds like a game. That's his season. Yet this defense, and Drew Brees will tell him, he's the kind of guy you've got to account for on the receiving game, the special teams game. He adds a kind of a bit of confidence to this team.
Yeah, I think Nick Foles gives them the essence of a guy who spreads the ball around. I think Carson Wentz depended a lot on Zach Ertz at tight end. However, Nick Foles will go to Zach Ertz. He'll go to his backup, Gobert. He'll also throw to Alshon Jeffrey a lot. He likes Nelson Aguilar. So he'll spread the ball out a little bit more. When you've got guys involved, I think guys might play a little harder for you. Sproles will give them a running game. Even if it's not the traditional running game, the screen passes and the short passes, those 5 to 6 yard pickups will kind of mimic a running game for them, because they didn't have a really good running game against the Saints here the first time. They didn't have a running game against the Bears in Chicago last week. But if you can get enough screen passes going, if he can catch 6 or 7 passes for 35 yards, that mimics a running game, because even though you can't traditionally run it, you're still picking up a yard, you're still moving the sticks, and that's important to an offense.
Well, the Saints defense has been instrumental for the Saints the last few games of this season. What exactly are they doing so well? Is it the up front? Is it the front line? Is it the secondary, the linebacker core? What exactly is it for the Saints defense that makes them so good at the end of the season?
I think they got it all together finally. They finally got the cohesion. You heard them talking about communication in the secondary. Well, a lot of it is you don't know who's got your back. And if you don't know who's got your back, then you're a little bit unsteady. And if you don't trust the guy, then you're trying to do a little too much. Now with Eli Apple, they added Eli Apple. That's been a huge addition to what they want to do. Von Bell has been playing extremely well at safety. You've got Marshawn Lattimore on the other side. You got Marcus Williams at safety. And I think they found the cohesion they want in the secondary, and that's been aided by the guys up front. You've got some linebackers who can cover. Alexander Zalone is having a phenomenal season. DeMario Davis had a phenomenal season. A.J. Klein really had a good season. Then you go up front, and their ability to rush the passer, to get a guy off his timing, to make him throw a little bit quicker than he wants to get some hits on him, has been disruptive, and I think that's fed into the whole process.
And it all started really with the Rams game in Week 9. I think, as John said, totally right. This defense kind of came together as a unit, and it's been the takeaways. The overall turnover ratio is the Saints are +8, the Eagles are -6, but the Saints defense in the last 9, 10, 11 games have really always gotten 1 or 2. Chris Banjo, 2 picks, and they had 3 turnovers in that first game here. So, and they've been able to get pressure without having to blitz a lot, and that's been. And if you can do that as a defensive front, and you can get pressure with a Davenport and certainly Cam Jordan and Sheldon Rankins is just playing unbelievable football. And so when you're able to get some pressure with that front 4, it makes your linebackers better, it makes your DBs better, it just changes the whole ballgame. So I think they just kind of came together. You needed an Eli Apple. Last year, Marshawn had this kind of strut to him, and Ken Crawley kind of fed off of it. And, Ken's had a tough year, and so they needed that other person because you're going to get beat. If you play that position not trying to get beat, you're dead. You've got to get out there and man up like a Marshawn does. And so it's really more pressure, I think, on the guy opposite Marshawn because they're not looking at Marshawn too much. And so it is pressure on Eli Apple and PJ and all those other guys. And when there's pressure, they've answered the call.
On the other side of the ball, the Saints are getting a major offensive weapon back in Ted Ginn Jr. He's adding to an Alvin Kamara, Michael Thomas, Mark Ingram. What exactly do you expect to see from the Saints offense today? Do you expect to see more of a pass-heavy offense or a run-heavy offense?
Well, I would hope it would be balanced. I mean, I would hope that, this team led the NFL in rushing touchdowns, 26. Their play calling, run to pass has been balanced. So if you're asking me as an analyst or a fan, I would say I hope it is more running. What Ted Ginn does is the same thing we just talked about from the defensive side, what the D-line does to the backs. It takes pressure off Michael Thomas. If you've only got to cover Michael Thomas and you're not so worried about who's on that other side, it changes your ball game. With a Ted Ginn out there, it makes you play more kind of, man defense and where is he as opposed to where is just Michael Thomas. The catch he made against the Pittsburgh 3rd and 20, humongous catch. He had 5 catches in that game, didn't play against Carolina, but he is a huge, significant factor in coming back to take pressure off this offense.
Yeah, when you hear Coach Payton talk about him, he always says Ted can run. We can all run. However, what he means is when you're covering Ted Ginn Jr., if Mike's covering me, he can be right here. He can press me. If he's covering Ted Ginn Jr., he's going to get back about 10 yards because he's going to need that space because Ted Ginn will close that cushion. He forces the defense to back off. He loosens up the defense, and that gives you some of those things that you're able to get underneath. I don't think the Saints were quite as vertical as they like to be without Ted Ginn Jr. Now they have him back. You can be vertical a little bit more. He opens up the things underneath, and we know that intermediate routes, Michael Thomas feasts on those kinds of routes. Also, you get your tight ends involved, Benjamin Watson, and hopefully Dan Arnold. So those kinds of things. And then don't forget what Alvin Kamara can do out of the backfield as a receiver. We saw him get Malcolm Jenkins on one deep in the first game. So we understand that. But having Ted Ginn Jr. back, he just forces the defense to back up, get back, respect his speed, because even though he's an older guy, he can still run really fast.
He's got fresh legs.
Yes.
I mean, you're right, he's not your youngest guy on the team, but he's got fresh legs. He was inactive for many games since week 10, and so he come back and play the Pittsburgh game, which I think was humongous. But for the most part, he's got fresh legs, and you need that come January.
Well, let's not forget about the facilitator of this Saints offense, Drew Brees. He spoke to the media earlier this week about this divisional playoff game.
Could you talk first about Nick Foles,
Yeah.
sort of what you see in him now?
He's always been a pretty calm, cool customer. You look obviously at what he was able to accomplish last year, and certainly what he's been able to accomplish this year. Here, during the latter part of the season, he makes plays, and I think he's got a lot of confidence in himself. I think their team seems to have a lot of confidence in him as well. We played them in the playoffs. What was that, 2013, when he was the starter there with Chip Kelly, and obviously they had a great team then, and he was playing well then too. And, I know from there, I guess, Rams, Chiefs, and then back to the Eagles. But, I remember seeing him play in high school. The 10-year anniversary for my high school football team, state championship, was 2006. So it was actually during the season. It was a Friday night. I remember flying back and kind of being part of that homecoming experience, and starting quarterback for my high school at the time was Nick Foles. So funny how things, play out, but he's done a phenomenal job.
He took a lot of criticism in the offseason for sort of being okay, being a backup. What was sort of your take on that? And does he have a personality that maybe is a little different than a lot of quarterbacks?
Like I said, I think he's a pretty calm, cool, collected guy. I think for him, any of that stuff, I'm sure, was water off a duck's back. He doesn't seem to be bothered by that kind of thing. I didn't really follow their team in the off season, other than, you saw some of the moves that they make and you're like, man, those guys can be really, really good, which they are. So other than that, I stay in touch with them a little bit. and have been, happy for his success. He's obviously worked very hard for it.
Drew, this is the second week in a row we asked you about that Westlake quarterback.
Yeah, there you go.
What is the deal with that back?
Oh man, something in that Colorado River water, I guess.
JD pointed out earlier this week the Saints averaged 31.5 points per game in the regular season, but only 19 points per game in the last 5. What does Drew Brees in this offense need to do to get in a better offensive rhythm this game?
Well, I think they put in the proper tweaks, but they got to be able to run the ball. You've got to be able to run the ball in the NFL if you want to be a good offense and if you want to score. You have to be able to run. Saying that, Philadelphia's defensive weakness is that secondary. They're really good up front, but that secondary is a little bit suspect, and that's what the Saints took advantage of the first time. I think they're going to take advantage of it again today. I think they're going to throw it around the yard a little bit, and they might balance it out with the run a little bit later. But I think initially they're going to attack mode. They're going to do it in the air, and they're going to look to jump on Philly early to force Philly into a comeback mode. So I think Drew Brees is going to be sharp because they've had a couple of weeks to not only tweak what they were doing wrong, but to kind of listen to people say, oh, what's wrong with the Saints offense? You know Drew Brees and Sean Payton don't like to have people question this offense because of what they've been able to do since 2006. Now, it happens periodically, and every time it happens, it seems they come up with a bust-out game. I think this could be that kind of game.
I was actually happy to see some of the bad blood that they had between, this wasn't Sean and Doug, but some of the bad blood. I just felt like this team needed a little juice to get into it. And, Drew Brees has been so unbelievable in playoff games here. He's 5-0 home playoff games. This just shows you how kind of not overconfident, but how, anyway, Drew, it was 67% completion percentage in those 5 games. Most teams would go, yes. He's 74 almost all the time. It's like 67? Oh, what happened, And so 2.4 touchdowns in those 5 games, and only once in those 5 home playoff games has he thrown a pick, and that was Carolina last year. He's smart. He knows what he's doing. But I agree with John. I think Sean doesn't, this whole whatever they might, philosophy might be, let's run to set up the pass. He's going to do whatever he has to do at whatever their greatest weakness is off the top. I'm always interested to see what happens on the coin toss. And almost inevitably now, the rule is you defer. You defer. And so I always love when these teams come in, win the toss, defer, and give Drew the ball for an extra series at home. I'm like, okay. Because generally, I don't know many coaches out there that are better at drawing up that first drive than Sean Payton.
Let's not forget about the large motivation that Drew Brees adds for this team. We heard it all year long. Justin Hardy was always talking about, we want to go out there and win a Super Bowl for Drew Brees. That starts here today, but what kind of motivation do you have if you're a player on this team playing for Drew Brees and you see his work ethic each and every day, you know his routine? What kind of motivation does that add if you're a teammate of Drew Brees?
Well, you don't want to let him down. You see the way he works and the way he prepares and the way he's getting his body ready all year round. You don't want to let him down. So a lot of these guys, even the younger guys who really don't understand what the NFL is about, you start watching that guy and you say, okay, if I'll do some of what he's doing, I might have a chance in this league. And you just don't want to let him down. A to Z, lineman to tackle to anybody on this team, everybody wants to play well for Drew Brees. I don't think if he wins it, he's going to retire or anything like that, but you just don't want to let him down because you know you don't get the opportunity to do this every year. When the Saints won it in 2009, I think everybody felt like, oh, there's a big open window here, and they're going to have several more chances in the next 3-4 years. That window closed. They closed fast in the NFL, so you got to get it when you got a chance.
I agree. All you need to do to answer that question is watch Drew Brees warm up. And I don't mean passing. I mean warm up, limber up, stretch. It's like an 8-year-old. I'm just like, it's unbelievable. That just shows you the kind of work ethic he puts in. I would go back to the offensive line about not letting Drew down. They protect him like he is their only child. I mean, he's been sacked 20 times, second fewest in the NFL. He's been hit 52 times, quarterback hits, the fewest in the NFL. Man, certainly a lot of that is on Drew. He gets rid of it quickly. He's a smart quarterback. He doesn't take a lot of sacks, doesn't take a lot of hits, and so he just does what you want him to do. But that offensive line around him, and we get Teron Armstead, who's been out with the pectoral muscle. They've, for the last 3 weeks, literally, it's the offensive line they've been the injury report. And so to get those guys back, Teron back, they want to protect Drew.
Absolutely. The offensive line will be healthy. I believe this is the first time all of the starters have been back since week 10, so certainly looking forward to having that back. Roman Harper spoke earlier to the media. Let's go ahead and listen to see what he had to say.
So I guess, you know what, how are you feeling as the Saints go into this big weekend?
Well, I'm excited for them for this opportunity. After winning a Super Bowl championship, the biggest feeling I get from watching other guys that I know is hopefully they get the same opportunity I did and they get to share that feeling of winning a Super Bowl. And this is just the first step. They got 3 big games and this is the first one. Luckily, 2 of them will automatically be at home and they got to go get it. I'm excited for them to see what they're going to do.
You know what that home field advantage means in the playoffs.
Yeah.
Tell me what does it mean as a player? What does that mean?
Well, as a player, I don't think you really understand it until you don't have home field advantage. Some of these young guys, this might be some of their first playoff experiences. We had to think everything last year, but this year all the pressure's on them. So everybody's looking forward to the Saints really just cruising right through or kind of really getting back to what they were doing early in this year. So it's going to be a lot of pressure on them, but they got to understand if they come out, start fast, do what they're capable of doing and kind of just believing on each other and really don't change anything up, just be exactly who they've been all year. That's going to give them the best chance to go out there and win this thing. And I'm excited to see how they go out there and perform Sunday. They got to really start fast. They're going against a veteran team like Philly who's been there. Nick Foles is going to give this team all kinds of confidence. So no matter if you're up 20, if you're up 3, Philly still think they're going to have a chance or that they're in the game. So they got to go out here and go out there, start fast, and then close the door on them as well late in the game. So we're going to see how this thing's going to play. The crowd's going to definitely play a factor into it. These guys are already juiced up. They're all out here today, including the weather and the heat, everything that's happening, and it should be a fun environment on Sunday.
That's the last question I was going to have for you is just about these Houdads, right, that show
Yeah.
up. I heard them saying we thought it was going to be like 100 people. It was a lot more than that. So, being a Saint and having that kind of support and just everybody, there's so much love in the air, right?
It does. And, after going to other places, you kind of realize how unique this system is here in New Orleans that most of their fans here are from here. People don't just move here out of, not like other big cities or big markets. New Orleans, everybody's from here, and they grew up loving the Saints, and now they all love the Saints when they're 30, 40 years old, and it's only more. So that is a unique opportunity, and this group of people of New Orleans, it's all like family, and everybody loves one another, and it's a beautiful place, and with such soul and such flavor, and that's why I can't get enough. That's why you always catch me walking around here and visiting with people because they treat me just like one of them.
I got one quick question.
Yeah.
How do you think this team rates compared to the 2009 Super Bowl champions?
Well, they need to win a couple more games before I can actually compare them. I think the record's similar. They lost to the same teams, but not in the same fashion. They lost at different points in the season. We lost all 3 late in the end of the year after starting 13-0. So that's the comparison. I like that this team also hangs out together. I like that this team loves one another. Those are some of the simulators that we have. But defensively, we were completely different. We were more of an opportunistic defense. This was more of a steady defense that just makes plays over and over. This offense is, they have big plays, but we made big plays with all different guys from all different ways. And I think this run game is much, much more important to Drew Brees now than it was in 2009. So they got to get that going as well.
Thank you, Roman.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Roman.
Thanks
Yeah.
a lot.
Guys, before we get this game started, any final thoughts or if you had any keys for the Eagles and Saints to say, if you do this, you will win this game today, what would you say they would be for each team?
Well, I mean, to me, and Coach Payton talked about this earlier this week, it's the kind of the intangibles. When you look at this Philly defense and the Saints defense, both teams give up 22 points a game. That's a weird number, but they both give up 22 points a game. The Eagles give up 5.7 yards a carry. The Saints give up 5.8. They average right around the same first downs. They both have great time of possession. They're very mathematically very similar. And so what Coach Payton said is who's gonna do well in the red zone? Who's gonna force a team to kick a 3 instead of a 7? Who's going to score that 7 instead of taking that 3? And that's offense and defense. And that's where the Saints have been so strong. They're one of the best in the red zone, scoring touchdowns, I think 70%, and the best and goal-to-go situations at 85%. So if the defense, if you're as a defense, you make them kick and not score touchdowns, and as an offense, you score touchdowns and don't kick, it changes the whole ball game. They get off the field on third down.
Yeah, I'm going to stay with that theme. Hit Nick. You got to hit Nick Foles. You got to get him on the ground. You got to get him on schedule. You got to get him thinking, oh, the pressure's coming. You've got to get inside his head. That's been really hard to do for teams the last couple of seasons. The guy didn't win the Super Bowl for no reason. He threw for 970 yards in 3 playoff games last year. He wore teams out. So you've got to get him off schedule. You've got to think. You got to get him thinking. Got to hear him. Get him hearing footsteps along the way, and hopefully that'll be enough. And the Saints offensively, I think they just got to attack that secondary. I think they can, even though Philly had some guys back from the first game. 2 guys played in that first game were called up from the practice squad. Right. Neither one of those guys are going to be playing in this game, but I still think they can take advantage of Philly in the secondary. What do you think?
I think red zone for the Saints. They need to execute in the red zone. You know, the Eagles defense, as you said, has the best red zone defense. If the Saints execute in the red zone, and they cannot let Nick Foles have the ball in the final 2 minutes of the game. If it's a 1-score game and Nick Foles has the ball in the final 2 minutes, I think it's going to be a tough game for the Saints.
They certainly believe in him. They believe in him. You know, coming into this game, coming into the season, Sean Payton and this era had never defeated a Super Bowl champion. They were 0-6, and then they beat the Eagles. Now they're going to do it again. So you finally kind of get that off your back. You beat a Super Bowl champion, but now you got to do it twice. And let me say this: 340, this place will be ready.
And a lot of people don't know this about JD, but he loves to dance. JD, favorite dance move from this season: the Sheldon Shimmy or the Sean Payton? Sean Payton. Do the Sean Payton.
I'm a shimmy guy.
Here, shimmy. He's a shimmy. It's the fraternity in him. He loves this. He loves the shimmy. All right, for all of us on the Saints pregame show, thanks for joining us. Kickoff is at 3:40. Make sure you tune in on Fox. Thanks for joining us.